really pleased and honored to be able to introduce Ruby Leung, probably saying it wrong, from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Ruby is, among many other things, the chief scientist on the E3SM project, which I'm sure everybody probably knows at least a little bit about. She's currently PI of 4 projects, but I looked at over the years, and I have this metric I came up with, PI project years, and she's had 43 project PI years at NERSC, which is number 10 amongst all the PIs that I've been able to find. So congratulations on that. The other thing that I found was at least 180 publications that you've authored that acknowledge NERSC. So thank you for that. And today she's going to tell us about Earth system modeling for actionable science. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby. Let me get out of this. Oops, wrong way.
Right. Thank you very much, first of all, Richard, for the invitation to give one of the webinar in this webinar series. I'm really honored to be doing that. So let me first of all share my screen so that we can get started. All right. So I assume you can see my presentation. So as Richard said, I'm going to talk about Earth system modeling for actionable science. This is in the NERSC 50th anniversary webinar series, and most of my research in the last 30 years has been related to climate modeling, or now we also call it Earth system modeling. Of course, using a lot of NERSC resources, as Richard pointed out. So first of all, let me kind of like start by introducing a little bit what do we mean by actionable science and how do we build the foundations for Earth system science. So as in any other fields of science, right? So the 3 main tools that we use would be the theory, the observation, and the modeling. And by using a combination of these, then we gain an understanding, and also we can do prediction. Prediction is particularly important for Earth system or climate science because there is in fact a demand for some of the information that we are providing, because there is a lot of societal implications for the predictions that we are producing. But also very importantly, because of this connection to society, we need to share our information. So not only that it is not only just for science purpose, but we need to share our scientific insights as well as predictions or projections with the society. And we also need to explain the predictions, right? Because if you provide the predictions and simply said that our models predict this is going to happen without an explanation, it would be very difficult for the general public to understand and have faith or trust in the prediction. So it is very important that we combine the understanding and the prediction together with sharing the information and providing the explanation. And together, I think this is all what I mean by actionable science. And I will go a little bit more into that when we discuss the E3SM project. And because this is a presentation particularly wanting to give you some examples of how we have been using NERSC, so obviously then I would be focusing a bit more on modeling rather than the theory and observation, but just want to emphasize that those are the 3 important pieces of building the foundations of Earth system science. And also want to mention that even though I have started using resources from NERSC for many years, but I want to focus more on just the last decade of Earth system modeling facilitated by NERSC. So today I'm going to touch on 3 different areas. The first one is on model development. In order to gain insights and do prediction, we need to first of all develop the models that we use to do that. So I will give examples of global Earth system models. And the models, some of them have capabilities to do what we call multi-resolution. So it's not just a single resolution. Go into cloud resolving modeling at very fine scale, and also a hierarchy of models, meaning that there are simple models as well as complex models, and we consider them to be all important. And besides talking about model development, I would also give some examples of numerical experiments. These are like simulations that we do using the models to gain some insights about past, present, and future climates, understanding predictability of the Earth system. And I will also talk about some storyline simulations, and I will explain a little bit like what do we mean by storyline simulations. And then lastly, I would just give one example of data set development, even though this is not specifically about developing or using numerical models, but it is very important that we have data sets to do the analysis or evaluate our models in order to gain some insights. And so here I acknowledge all of these various projects that have been making our research possible. So first of all, then let's go into talking about model development. So the reason partly why I am emphasizing the last decade is because the DOE flagship model is called the Energy Exascale Earth System Model. We call it E3SM. We started this project actually since 2014, so this is almost exactly 10 years. And this year we are also celebrating our anniversary, not 50 years, but 10-year anniversary of the E3SM project. So I will tell a little bit about the development of this project, as well as a lot of the simulations that I talk about will be based on this particular model. So the E3SM project, right from the beginning, we set up our so-called actionable science goals. We wanted this model to be able to provide actionable science and information. So how do we do that? So we develop a strategy emphasizing 3 particular areas. The first one is to push towards higher resolution, because high resolution is particularly important when we wanted to provide information about extreme weather events like hurricanes or atmospheric rivers or severe thunderstorms and things like that. And we wanted to know how these extreme weather events may be changing that would be affecting the society, including energy infrastructure, because this is a Department of Energy's effort. So we do put some emphasis on energy infrastructure and use. And so for that, going to higher resolution is important to get that kind of information. And secondly, we also emphasize that we need to represent not only the natural processes in the Earth system, like the atmosphere, the land, but we also need to include other information such as the managed system and the man-made systems, because it is the interaction between the natural system and the human system that together determine the outcomes of what might happen in the future. And then lastly, we also wanted to do ensemble modeling so that we can quantify uncertainty. When we provide projections or predictions of the future, we need to quantify how much uncertainty is associated with that. So with these 3 goals, we hope that the information and the insights that we are providing would be actionable for stakeholders that would be using such insights or information. So different from perhaps many other efforts around the world, in our E3SM project, we particularly really emphasize the collaboration between Earth system scientists and computational scientists, because we wanted to take advantage of technologies, particularly related to mathematics and computational science. So in our project, we have probably around 30% of our staff members are actually computational scientists and mathematicians working together with Earth system scientists. So the E3SM project is a collaboration among 8 different national labs indicated over here. So our project, as I said, we started developing our model since 2014. And so far, we have already developed 3 different versions of E3SM. We have version 1 that was released in 2018, version 2 that was released in 2021, and then more recently, we just released our version 3. And so this E3SM model represents interactions across many different components as well as across many scales. In terms of components, as you can see, our models represent many, many components of the Earth system, including the atmosphere, ocean, river, land, human system, sea ice, land ice. And these components are coupled together using a flux coupler that help parse information predicted by each piece of the model. And compared to many other similar efforts around the world, I would say that our model is a bit unique in several sense. Number one, our river model is probably a bit more sophisticated than the ones that are used in other models. Our land ice component is also rather unique, and also not many models would actually include the land ice and the ice shelf that is along the edges, the coastal region of the land ice or the ice sheet. And then also most Earth system models do not actually represent human systems. So in that sense, our model is actually rather unique in terms of the components in our model. But also our model is quite unique in the sense that we can configure our model in many different ways, particularly in terms of resolution. So here I indicate the model resolution for each of these models, like atmosphere and land model, ocean and ice model, and also the river model. Our lower resolution model, which we also call standard resolution, because this is actually a very typical type of resolution or configuration that is used by many other modeling centers, is relatively coarse resolution with the atmosphere represented at 100 kilometer, and then ocean and sea ice represented at 30 to 60, and river at 50. And then we also have a higher resolution configuration where we go to 25 kilometer for the atmosphere, but that is still not quite sufficient if we really wanted to better represent a lot of the processes in the atmosphere that are affected by clouds. And so we have a particular version of our model that we call cloud resolving model, where we get down all the way to 3 kilometer. And also interestingly, our models have the capabilities to actually use variable resolution because we take advantage of unstructured grid technology. So we can do resolution, for example, in this example here, where we zoom in over North America, where we do higher resolution at 25 kilometer, whereas the rest of the globe is still represented at 100 kilometer. So this really allows us to have a lot of computational saving, while some of the detailed information can still be provided over North America when we get down to 25 kilometer resolution. Similarly, for the ocean, we can also do variable resolution. And in this example, we put higher resolution along the coastal region of North America and then lower resolution elsewhere. Similarly, we have another configuration called the Southern Ocean Regional Refined Mesh, which I will talk about a bit more, where we put high resolution over Antarctica and the surrounding ocean area. And that's because of our interest in the ice sheet and the instability associated with that. So this regional refined model we call ROM is a very important feature, which I will also give a little bit more information about. So now getting to this modeling of the ice shelf and ocean interactions. As I said, this is a pretty unique capability in the ETHRSR model because in most climate models, let's say if you are looking at Antarctica where there is the ice sheet covering Antarctica, along the coastal area, the ice sheet actually come out and actually be in touch with the ocean. Because the ocean is much warmer, so clearly the ocean will cause melting of the ice sheet. And this usually actually happen from beneath because the ocean is quite a bit warmer deep down. And therefore the melting of the ice sheet from below can cause the ice shelf to melt. And the more the melting, it can actually cause the ice shelf to become unstable and break off from the ice sheet. And this can cause a severe this can cause instability that can potentially cause very high sea level rise. And so really understanding and quantifying future sea level rise is one of the major goals that we have because it has significant impacts on the coastal communities and also on the society. And therefore, in our model, we actually represent this kind of process where the ice shelf can interact with the ocean and then produce melt rate and therefore cause ice shelf instability. So this is an example of the refined mesh that I talk about, where we have higher resolution surrounding the Arctic region at 12 kilometer and elsewhere is at 30 to 60 kilometer resolution. And here just a simulation to show you where we can simulate the melting of the ice shelf from beneath due to the warmer ocean in the historical climate and also in the future, where in the future, because of the warming, we see larger melt rate coming from the coastal region along the ice sheet, and this could potentially cause instability of the ice shelf in the future. Another unique feature that I mentioned is about the human-Earth interactions. In order to achieve this, our E3SM model actually coupled to a human system model, and this model is called Global Change Analysis Model. So this model is unique in a sense that it does represent a lot of the human systems, including technology, economic activity, demographics, urbanization, resource demands, etc., etc. So by coupling these two kinds of model together, then we can exchange information. Like for example, the E3SM model can simulate how climate change may be affecting vegetation growth, and that would constrain how much of the land can actually be used to produce food. And then this could provide back information regarding the human land use, which would fit into the E3SM model. So a unique application of this type of model is to use it to evaluate the feasibility and also the impacts of decarbonization scenarios, because a lot of the decarbonization may be relying on the use of bioenergy as well as renewable energy, and all of these would be affected by climate change, therefore constraining what scenarios or strategies can actually be used to decarbonize the society. And then lastly, very important in our goal is to push the frontier of resolution. So we do this by developing our global cloud resolving model. So this particular model is called a simple cloud resolving E3SM atmosphere model. We call it SCREAM. So we originally developed version 0 as a Fortran code. And the first simulations for 40 days were performed on the NERSC KNL Cori machine. And first of all, why do we really need to resolve clouds? And that's really get to the point that a lot of the uncertainties in simulating climate and projecting how the climate may change in the future are related actually to the representation of the clouds and the related processes. And therefore, by better representing or modeling clouds, such as shown here, simulated by the SCREAM model, so you see a satellite image of the cloud cover over the coastal region. And in the SCREAM simulation at 3 kilometers, we really very well represent the spatial pattern as well as the cloud cover. And so because we wanted our model to be able to have good performance on many different kinds of machines, including like NVIDIA, AMD, and the Intel GPUs. So in our first version of V0 SCREAM version, we ported the SCREAM model to be written in C++ and Cocos. And therefore now our model can run on all kinds of GPU machines, including the Perlmutter. So I like to particularly mention that we are now performing the first decadal simulations, by simulations not only lasting for 40 days, but lasting for a decade long, so that we can actually look at how clouds distribute around the world, and under global warming, how the distribution of the cloud may be changing and therefore affect the reflection of the sunlight and trapping of the outgoing long wave radiation to affect how much energy would be influencing the Earth system. So this is currently being done on NERSC Perlmutter using the GPU nodes. And also importantly, as we go to higher and higher resolution and including more and more features in our model, like ice shelf ocean interactions and natural Earth system and human system interactions, we also cannot forget that when we try to understand our model projections, a lot of time we need to simplify our model to isolate which factor or which feedback process is actually controlling how our system behave in the future. So for that, we emphasize the development of a model hierarchy where we simplify the model. For example, we remove all the land in our model so that it's only covered by ocean, or we can specifically remove certain interactive process to isolate how important that kind of interactions, for example, related to the interactions between the clouds and the radiation, etc. So this hierarchy of model of many different kinds of configurations, including even capabilities to trace the moisture in the atmosphere and the land, all of these capabilities right now are being developed under another project that I am a PI of. So with that, I'm now going to go to my second part to give you some examples of simulations that we do and what do we learn from these simulations. So first of all, our E3SM model, as I said, we have 3 versions already. Our first version 1, after we develop the model, we have to take the baby steps to make sure that our model actually is giving us a credible simulation of the climate system. So number 1, we check that if during the pre-industrial period, when there are no anthropogenic forcings, not increasing greenhouse gases, no land use, land cover change, etc., then the energy at the top of the atmosphere should be balanced. And so we check that indeed our model can get this kind of balance of the atmosphere, of the energy at the top of the atmosphere. We also apply our model and make it run on the PNNL query machine, and then we determine the processor layout to give us the best computational performance to run our simulations over there. And we also ran many, many different kinds of simulations, including simulations of the historical period, so that we can compare with observation and also compare with other models that are doing the same thing. So here I'm just showing you several different variables, including, for example, surface temperature, precipitation. We compare our model configure using a fully coupled model, which is shown in blue, and then in a configuration where the sea surface temperature is prescribed. This is shown by the red dot. And we see, if we look at the root mean square error, our models definitely have lower root mean square error compared to many other models, which are shown by the whisker plot over here. So suggesting that our model scale is at least comparable, if not better than other models. And then we continue to look at our regional refined model, where we go to higher resolution over North America and also the surrounding ocean. We can see that even just by going to higher resolution over North America, we can gain some benefits. For example, in simulating the precipitation amount during wintertime in the Western United States, definitely very much affected by the mountains and the valleys. So at 25-kilometer resolution, it's much more comparable to the observation than the low resolution simulation. And then we use our model to try to understand how predictable the climate is and what might be the sources of the predictability, because we have a lot of interest in extreme events. So recently we performed a set of simulations using the NERSC machine, the Perlmutter. And here we are particularly motivated by the fact that when we look at how predictable the climate system is, generally, if we are looking at very short time scale, let's say in the next few days, this is like predicting the weather, and predicting the weather is very important to better initialize the atmosphere. But as you go to longer and longer time scale, our belief is that it is more important to have a better ocean initialization, because the ocean has such long memory. But we feel that the land surface, such as soil moisture, probably give you predictability of the order of, let's say, a month, because soil moisture, the time scale is not that long. So here we implemented a land data assimilation system into E3SM and try to better initialize the soil moisture and the soil temperature over land. And we see what might be the impacts of such improved initial conditions based on the land surface condition. And we find that when we look at the 2003 European heat wave, based on observation data, we see a set of stationary waves by low pressure, high pressure, low pressure, high pressure. So over Europe, during the summer of 2003, the European heat wave is because of a high pressure system, basically sitting there for many, many days. In fact, almost like 2 months, and therefore causing very warm temperature over there. We find that even just by initializing better our land surface with the soil moisture and the temperature, the ETHRESA model can actually predict this European heat wave 2 years in advance, suggesting that we need to pay more attention to the predictability actually coming from the land surface, which is something that has been neglected in our community for a long time. And since I'm talking about heat waves, it would be also useful to look at how heat waves might be changing in the future. So here, instead of doing our own simulations, we actually take advantage of NERSC with very large data volume, actually archiving lots and lots of data over there, including climate simulations from many, many climate centers around the world. So we take all of these, what we call multi-model ensembles, and look at how heat wave over the Pacific Northwest may be changing. We are particularly inspired by the fact that in 2021, the Pacific Northwest heat wave hit the region really hard. And so looking at these data archive on NERSC, we were able to identify that in the future, the models robustly project that there would be an increase in this kind of heat wave over the Pacific Northwest. We call them heat dome. There is an increased frequency as well as an increase in the intensity. And then lastly, I'm going to give you just a few examples, all related to thunderstorms and how they may be changing in the future. We are particularly interested in very large thunderstorms. We call them organized convective storms or mesoscale convective systems, MCS. These storms are very important because they are ubiquitous. They happen all the time over the tropical ocean, and over land, they also happen quite often, especially during the summertime, and they can produce flooding and also wind damages. And in order to simulate these kind of storms, even though they are very big, like for example, the example shown over here, you can see that the storm actually covered an area larger than the size of the state of Oklahoma. But even though the storms are very big, but the initiation of the storms actually happen at small scale. And we need to be able to simulate these clouds and the convection at very small scale in order to do this kind of simulation. And this is where we can take advantage of the SCREAM model, as well as other regional models that can get down to this kind of resolution. So my first example is to show you a derecho, which is a subset of mesoscale convective systems. A derecho that particularly happened in 2012, knocked down lots of power poles and caused a lot of damages over the United States. So when we use the SCREAM model at 3-kilometer resolution, only regionally in Eastern North America, we find that our model is able to capture the very strong winds up to 30 meters per second. No wonder knocking down power pole. And then we use a regional model also at this kind of resolution to simulate how it looks like as observed in the past. And also if it happens again in the future where the condition would be different, where the atmosphere would be warmer and moister, how would this derecho behave? This is what we call storyline simulation, is to pick a specific event that happened in the past and simulate it again under future condition. So we find that for this particular derecho, under global warming condition, in fact, it will weaken and decay earlier. And the reason is explained in a paper, which I will not have time to discuss. Another example, we use a regional model also at 3-kilometer resolution to simulate a really big thunderstorms. In fact, a sequence of thunderstorms that kind of pass over Texas and Oklahoma, producing severe flooding in the two states. And we simulate this storm that happened in 2015 again, using a regional model under future condition. And we summarize the changes over here. Essentially, we are seeing the convective part of the storm would become much stronger, producing heavier precipitation and altogether larger area and more rainfall that can cause more severe flooding in the future. One more example is to show you looking at convective storms in the Amazon basin. The reason why we are interested in this is because actually tree mortality happen in tropical forests a lot. But in the Amazon basin, a lot of the trees were killed not by drought, but actually by strong winds from convective storms that just uproot the tree. And so in fact, squall lines, which again is a subset of MCS, account for 50% of the tree mortality across the Amazon basin. So after the trees are uprooted, then they can release the carbon, and that can contribute to CO2 increase in the atmosphere. So we use our screen model at 3 kilometers, well simulated squall line that happened, knock down lots of trees over the Manaus region. And we see that projecting into the future, this same storm could actually knock down trees probably for an area about 10 times as big as before. So lastly, just a very quick example of developing data sets. So because of our interest in looking at thunderstorms, we also developed a thunderstorm data set by tracking all of these MCSs using satellite data. So now we have 20 years of global MCS data together with the environment, which are three-dimensional data like the temperature, the moisture, etc., so that we can study why these storms formed in the past. And so this is a huge data set which we archive at NERSC, accessible using Globus endpoint, currently being used by more than 40 research groups after we released the data in 2021. So the last decade of Earth system modeling facilitated by NERSC, we have been able to do a lot of model development. We do a lot of simulation campaigns and analysis, ongoing decadal screen global simulations at 3 kilometers, predictability experiments, etc., using many different kinds of model. Data storage and access is really critical for us because we produce lots and lots of data from our model. And we are grateful for the NESAP projects that help us optimize our code, improve performance, and also workflow. And lastly, I really wanted to thank NERSC for really providing excellent facility and logistical support for the E3SM tutorial that just happened 2 months ago. And going into the future, we would be expanding some of our use of the screen model for very high resolution modeling, further expanding capabilities in modeling human and Earth interactions, as well as also incorporating or leveraging AI machine learning to help us with Earth system modeling. So with that, congratulations to NERSC on the 50th anniversary, and thank you for the decades of support for Earth system research and modeling.
Well, thank you, Ruby. That was a great talk. It was really interesting. I don't know if you have a couple of minutes maybe to stay around for a few questions,
I
if
do.
we have some. So we'll start you off with one. Chris wrote, apologies if I missed this, but does E3SM also include methane release from sources like melting permafrost in the models? If so, does that make significant difference to the results?
Yes, so representing methane is an important part of Earth system modeling. So we do have some capabilities, but not the full capability to model the methane cycle. Like for example, in our lake model, we do represent the release, all of these chemical processes related to methane and the release of the methane. So yeah, some processes are in our model, but not the full methane cycle yet.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, are there other questions? What are the microphysics models employed in the simulations?
Yes, we currently in our version 3 as well as the screen model, we recently replaced the microphysics model that we use with something called P3, which has a better representation of particularly the ice processes for the microphysics. So P3 is the scheme that we have been using. Yeah, it's relatively new, incorporated into our model.
And here's a question I was kind of wondering about myself is, do you plan to go even higher grid resolutions than 3 kilometers for global simulations? Could a machine like Perlmutter with the GPU nodes suffice to run the model at 3 kilometers or finer, or what would you need to do that?
Yeah, so indeed, we can run our simulations at finer resolution than 3 kilometers. So it's more like a balancing act. Like the higher the resolution you go, you need more resources, and as well as the wall clock time to complete 1 year of simulation would be longer. And so oftentimes in climate modeling, we do want it to have longer time period because there's a lot of variability in the atmosphere. So it's more like a balancing act. Our model can go down to 1 kilometer without any problem. And recently, some work has also been done to even test it out at sub-kilometer scale resolution, like 100 meter, which we would call them large eddy simulations rather than cloud resolving simulation. So this is a direction that we are also kind of like pushing towards. But for practical and useful simulations for climate purpose, we do want it longer simulation so that so that would prevent us from going to very high resolution. Yeah, but practically it can be done.
And there's been a question about the slides. If you're able to share the slides, we'll post them on the website too.
Definitely, yes, I will do that.
Great. I had a question, and there was another one too about the ensembles. How many simulations do you need to make up what I guess what you would call an ensemble for a reasonable uncertainty quantification? And on those, do you start with like different random initial conditions or perturbations off of a baseline?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in order to quantify uncertainty, we normally think of ensemble simulations of different types. Number one, the parameterization or the physical processes that we represent in the model have some uncertainty. So you might want to perform some ensemble simulations where you would perturb the physics or the parameters used in your physics models. So this is one type of ensemble, which is mainly by changing the physics representation you use or perturbing the parameters of the physics models that you use. Another kind of ensemble simulations would be indeed to randomize or add some noise to the initial condition. And this kind of ensemble is what we call initial condition ensemble. And the purpose is to actually quantify the uncertainty related to the natural variability, because we know climate is highly variable. And so capturing this natural variability is important, and we do it by perturbing the initial condition. So there are different kinds of ensembles that we do, and each one would require ensemble members, which is why we need a lot of computational resources, and that's where NERSC can really help us. Generally, when we perturb initial conditions to look at natural variability, I would say of the order of 25 ensemble members would be needed. But if you perturb the parameter values of your model, that could end up being a much larger number, because there are quite a lot of parameters in our models that could cause uncertainty.
Okay, thank you. Maybe two more questions if you have time. One is asking if you have had any pain points using HPSS or mass storage that NERSC could help you with.
Yes, we store a lot of data. So oftentimes we would prefer not to just put data on HPSS, because retrieving it is a little bit of a pain. Yeah, so I think anything that can help us with being able to get more space to store the data for a longer period of time before we move the data over to HPSS would be useful. But we are already very grateful. We just joke among ourselves in our project team. It almost feels like the data storage at NERSC is infinite. And we are very grateful for that, because our model, as I said, produce a lot of model outputs. And because we need to explain our simulations, not just produce it, we need to explain why our model is telling us this. A lot of analysis is needed, and that's why we have to save a lot of variables at high temporal and spatial frequency.
Okay, and then the last question is, I'll paraphrase it a little bit, is how do you incorporate, or how do you deal with large disruptive events like major volcano or other kind of that kind of effect?
Yeah, so volcanic effect is included in the model. So when we run our model, things that are not internally produced, that the model cannot produce, like volcano, we actually prescribe them, because we do have a good data set that tells us like when a volcano happened, where, and things like that. So actually it's part of the input data that can give us the volcanoes and then how much sulfate, the SO2 is emitted by the volcano, and this has important effects. In fact, any of these major volcanoes after erupted, the earth can cool by of the order of like 5 years, and we do need to account for that.
Okay, and I lied. There is one more question I think is really interesting if you would answer, and this is especially these days, is do the models incorporate the effects of these large forest fires and the effect that they can have on climate?
Yes, our land surface model actually include ways to represent wildfires. And so that this include like the burn area and then the emissions, like the smokes coming from the fires and also the impacts on the ecosystem. But there are definitely rooms for improving these type of representations in our model. They are indeed very important. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. There's certainly seems to be a never-ending series of challenges to get
Yes.
more and more things to incorporate into the models. So we'll do our best to provide you the resources that you need to be able to do it.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you again. Yeah, that was really great. And yeah, if we could post this, if we could post the slides, that would be great too.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.